Hey, Larken Rose here. So there you are being a human being. And unless you're a total sociopath, you have some sort of belief system. You have some sort of moral code. You might even have like principles and convictions, but you must have some things you think about right and wrong and good and bad. However, a whole lot of people, sadly I would say most people, what they think about right and wrong is kind of for sale. And I can't think of a more obvious demonstration of that than politics. Because you have people who can understand and can express and can agree with certain principles, but suddenly when it comes down to it, their loyalty to another person or a political party or some group or some organization suddenly matters to them more than their principles. And that is them selling their soul, literally. Because if you want to describe your soul as who you really are and what you really believe and what you're really all about and all that stuff, the people who betray that for somebody else's sake, not because they changed their mind, not because somebody explained something to them and they go, oh, well, now I understand this and now I believe this different thing, but just because they sold out and they needed the approval or they needed to fit in or whatever else. And again, their loyalty to something other than the truth outranked their loyalty to the truth. And if your loyalty to anything or anybody outranks your loyalty to what is true and what is right, you're going to sell your soul. Probably already did. And so an obvious example is the conservatives these days who are desperately fishing for excuses to support Trump, even when over and over and over again he keeps doing things which conservatives for years and years and decades and centuries have said they were against. Conservatives used to be able to describe the point of due process. It's not okay for government to just say somebody's really, really bad and then punish them without having to, prove it. Have the burden of proof. Have the presumption of innocence unless and until someone is proven guilty. And the person has the right to confront his accusers and all that stuff. Conservatives, if they're on the receiving end of arbitrary authoritarian garbage, they understand those things. But if they were duped into cheering for a power-happy psycho who now doesn't give a crap about those, look how many conservatives literally sell their souls, their conscience, their opinions, their own belief system, the thing that makes them them. They sold that for loyalty to a wannabe dictator, power-happy psycho, and a political party that's currently cheering that. Now, lest anyone think I'm choosing sides, back up a few years and you can see a whole bunch of liberals who pride themselves on being about bodily autonomy and live and let live and to each his own and do what you want and be free and diversity is great. And then suddenly they're cheering for literally destroy anybody who won't take this experimental injection and shut down businesses and control everybody and coerce everybody into enriching big pharma because they all sold their souls. If they had any to begin with, they sold them. They don't believe in bodily autonomy. My body, my choice. And bullshit. Tell that to the people who were coerced and fired and bullied and into getting that stupid, completely unnecessary and dangerous injection. So no, you all sold your souls. There's not really any reason anybody should trust you or believe you ever again when you say you have principles, when you say you believe in bodily autonomy or anything else. Just like for the conservatives right now making excuses for, well, we don't really need to give everybody due process. Sometimes unlimited arbitrary authoritarian power, well, that's a good thing, or at least it's necessary, and we're going to make excuses for it. Okay, why should anybody ever believe you ever again? And when you're on the receiving end of that, next time some Democrat somewhere is in power and using the power that you're making excuses for right now and using it against you, what's your argument going to be? And that it wasn't that long ago where it was a big scandal that it came out that there are these flyers, I think it was FBI, some federal fascist agency, which now all of a sudden, now they're great because Mango Mussolini is in charge, so now we like these power-happy, unconstitutional, authoritarian bastards. But it wasn't that long ago when there was a flyer released that wasn't supposed to be for public consumption, which basically said, yeah, if people talk too much about the Constitution, they might be terrorists. Literally that. Literally that. And conservatives and constitutionalists were rightly outraged. Well, guess what? If you're not rightly outraged at that principle, regardless of who the target is, you don't have principles. You already sold your soul. You just don't want it used against you, and you don't give a shit if it's used against somebody else. Because you sold your soul. And you're an immoral, basically a piece of garbage. Because you're now making excuses for things you know are evil because your loyalty to some group or some political movement or whatever matters to you more than doing the right thing. Same is true of the left, same is true of the right, same is true of everybody who votes. Because the moment you try to put a master above yourself, which is what you're doing if you're voting for someone to political office, you're trying to put somebody above yourself. The moment you do that, you've given up your autonomy. You've given up your own philosophical anything. Now you're just a cheerleader for some master who you may hope is going to do certain things. But when he doesn't, and he turns out to be a power-happy jerk like all of them always do, what are your options? You can either say, whoops, shouldn't have done that, which thankfully a lot of conservatives are now at least doing that when it comes to Trump and realizing, wow, this is not conservatism. This is not constitutionalism. This is arbitrary authoritarian collectivism just as much as the left did. So you can say that, and maybe you can try to regain your soul by saying, here's what I believe no matter who's in power. No matter who gets elected, no matter which party I'm cheering for, here's what I actually believe. That's one option. Or you can sell your soul and make excuses for cheering for things you know are wrong and that you said are wrong and that you before, and probably again in the future, were perfectly capable of explaining why they're wrong, why they're dangerous, why they're destructive, why they're immoral. But at the moment, you're making excuses for it because you're selling your soul. And it's sad to watch. And the thing is, it isn't just horrible people who had horrible ideas advocating horrible actions. That's to be expected. It'll still be horrible, but it's to be expected. It's people who describe good principles and good morals and good ideas and then sell their soul and make excuses for evil. And that's everybody who votes, and it's inherent to the game of politics. And you really can't not do that unless you're a voluntarist and don't try to empower any ruling class over anybody. But that's only a tiny percentage of the population. So I'm just going to throw this out to each of you. If you look at yourself in the mirror and you watch the things you're either downplaying, maybe you're just not really mentioning them. I'm not going to really criticize that out loud because the guy doing it is the guy I voted for, so I'm going to be a little bit quiet. Whether it's just you're not going to say anything about evil, or you're going to make excuses for evil, or you're going to openly cheer for evil. This is what it takes to make America great again. Look at yourself in the mirror and ask yourself, have you said things before that obviously, blatantly, glaringly contradict what you are supporting right now? Have you talked about due process? Have you talked about limited government? Have you talked about whatever it is, whatever principles you claim to believe in? Have you said things before that obviously contradict what you're saying today? If you're a Trump supporter, the answer is yes. 100% it's yes. There is no other alternative. Because what Trump pretended he was going to do, or at least what his followers thought he was going to do, isn't what's happening. So if you're making excuses for this, you're betraying yourself. You literally sold your soul. So look at yourself in the mirror, and this is just as true of the political left. Look at yourself in the mirror and say, have I made excuses for things that I know were wrong? And that former me, maybe even future me, could perfectly explain why they're wrong, why it's not okay, why that's immoral and anti-human and anything else. Think carefully about that. Because if you're willing to do that, you are why all those tyrannical regimes in history happened. Because all of those, every single one, was people choosing loyalty to a political movement or a candidate or a party over actual principles. And open a history book if you don't know how that turns out every single time. And I don't use the phrase lightly when I'm talking about selling your soul. It really is doing that. It wasn't you changing your mind. It was you knowing it was wrong and not caring because something else mattered to you more than being on the side of justice. And if something matters to you more than being on the side of justice, you can bet political psychos, left, right, whatever, every side, they all do it. You can bet they will find ways to trick you and cajole you and scare you into being a cheerleader for evil. If you're okay with that, all right, you're an enemy of humanity. I hope humanity survives the evil done by the people that you sold your soul to. If you're not okay with that, then really dare to say out loud when somebody you cheered for, something you supported, goes against what you actually believe in. And right now we're seeing a gigantic test of that among a whole lot of conservatives. And to their credit, some are saying, this is not what I wanted. This is not okay. No, we don't get to flush due process down the toilet. Why are we empowering this? Why are we doing another undeclared war? This is not okay. This is not what I want. But way too many are either making excuses for it or just quietly not saying anything about what they helped make happen. And sadly, that even applies to a bunch of supposed libertarians and anarchists and voluntarists who cheered for Trump to get into power because they thought it would be better. And now he's doing evil crap. And a lot of them are still making excuses for it. And some of them are just sort of quietly, I'm not really going to criticize him that loudly because people might remind me that I sold my soul to him already. Yeah, maybe don't do that. And then you won't find yourself in the position of having to make excuses for evil. There's a thought.